Hi everyone, welcome to another ParkJet Table Talk. As the title says, today I wanted to talk about ParkJet's CG, or center of gravity, and things to think about for your maiden flight. A couple weeks ago, one of my newer viewers, Tahir, I think his name is pronounced, T-A-H-I-R. If I've mispronounced your name, Tahir, I'm sorry. I posed a question about center of gravity and some things to do with that. So about 3 days ago, this is my new RC Powers T50 version 5. I went through the maiden flight process with this plane, so I thought that it was an ideal opportunity to sort of discuss my thoughts, my experience with balancing a plane, getting it set up and ready to go for maiden, and then maiden flight, and then sort of a bit of the dialing in process that I go through after that to set myself up for long-term success. So there's all kinds of definitions of the center of gravity with respect to an airplane, better explained than I probably can. I think of the center of gravity, planes obviously move in three dimension: pitch, roll, and yaw. So somewhere in the middle of this plane, there's a magical point, if you will, where all the mojo happens, where the plane is just ideally balanced, where it flies and feels balanced while it's flying, and rotates easily on all three axes. But from our standpoint, or for today's video, I'm going to talk just mostly about getting the plane balanced properly and determining the center of gravity in the pitch, and then a little bit of balancing in the roll. In the comments down below, I'll have links to some other a blog post and a video talking about a bit more advanced things to do with balancing a plane. But today we'll be primarily just focusing on the more basic stuff. All right, so you've got your plans, and you have to put a little bit of trust. And again, I'm just talking about planes that somebody else has designed. If you're designing your own plane and you want to try and find out where the center of gravity is, I think there's all kinds of good calculators online. My NAMC partner Stefan, when I was part of NAMC, he used a mean area chord calculation, or wing mean area chord calculation, and the CG on the 4 planes that he designed were pretty much bang on every time. So you've got this symbol on your plans. This is actually from the MiG-35B, which you see me fly quite a bit as my quad racing motor test bed. So you've essentially got a circle with a plus sign or a cross through it. So dead center in the middle of this cross, that's where your starting CG should be. So what I do on my planes when I build them is when the plans are still laid out on the foam, is I just take a pin and I push it down through the foam, and then I might just kind of turn the pin a little bit just to make the hole big enough so that when I pull the paper off, I can still see the hole, and then after even after I paint it, I can still see it. So I'm going to demonstrate this in a little bit. I always like to balance, find the balance point of my plane, or where I need to put my battery and stuff before my maiden flight. I like to do that with the plane inverted. So that's why I normally have the hole visible in the foam, visible on the top, so that I can determine where that is to get started. Okay, so the center of gravity, will be, once you get it flying, your center of gravity might not be exactly where it is on the plans, but the center of gravity where it is on the plans is a good way to start. So I've already got a battery in here, essentially, where the plane is balanced for after I found where my plane balances. So I'm just going to demonstrate to you how I like to do, you can actually buy CG machines and other things, and I know there's all kinds of different ways to do this. So this is just, I find what works for me. So essentially, let's pretend I'm on the actual points where I've marked it, and essentially what I'm looking for is the plane to, can't seem to get it to balance here today. I'm looking for the plane to essentially balance neutrally. So when you're first finished building the plane, you might have to do that a few times. Kind of put the battery in, see how it balances, and then move it around. And what I forgot to say is you want to do this, you want to determine where your battery, the battery in this plane, I'm using a 2200 3-cell, accounts for over a third of the weight of the plane. So where the battery is located is quite important because it's representing a very large percentage of the mass in this plane. So, build your plane, make sure that you've got it all set up, all the little, zip ties for the cables inside, everything else. It's essentially the way you want it when you fly it. Don't take the CG sort of halfway through the build and go, okay, yeah, that's good, that's where my battery's going to go, because it's not going to be accurate. You want to do this and determine where your battery's going to go when the plane is completely finished. And then what I like to do is, once I've determined where the battery needs to go to balance on that CG point for the plans, is I'll just take a piece of tape. Normally I just use like some colored masking tape. This is just foam or painter's tape. And then what I do is I just put a piece of tape where the back of that battery is, so that in the event, I don't want to leave my battery in the plane and I may not be able to fly it, let's say, for a few days because of weather. That way I know exactly where my battery's going to go. And I like to do this when I'm at home, here when it's nice and quiet and there's no wind. Determine that at home before I get to the field. Because lots of times what happens, you'll get out to the field, you're already all excited. It might be a little bit of a breeze. You've got half a dozen looky-loo guys from your field all standing around oohing and ahhing about your new plane or telling you how to do it. So get it taken care of at home where you can mess around with adjusting the battery and all that sort of stuff, and then just mark it with the piece of tape, so then you get out to the field and you can plop the battery in there and you should be good to go. Just one more thing, bit of stress to reduce from your maiden flight. Okay, so we found that. The other thing that I like to do to balance it in the roll axis, so that I am not putting a whole ton of weight to one side that's going to interfere with its roll balance, is when I build my planes, I actually draw a line down the center of the electronics bay, and then I set my battery straddling that line, so the line in effect intersects straight down the center of the battery. That way I've got my as much of my weight balanced in the center line of the airplane, so that I'm not, I don't launch it and it wants to roll one way because I've got too much weight. What I find, and I know some people fly with their batteries, over to one side to counteract torque roll. What I do to compensate for torque rolls, I put my speed controller on the right-hand side, because in my planes, if they're going to have torque roll, they'll torque roll to the left. I find the speed controller is a little bit heavier than my receiver. My receiver's over here. So I find normally that that's enough weight to help me compensate for torque roll. So now you've essentially got your plane balanced on the marked CG per the plans in the pitch, and then put your battery dead center in the middle, and you should have a fairly good balance in the roll, at least to get you started. Okay, some more that you should do, or that I do before I take it to the field, maybe the day before, in case there's something you have to change. And you can, let's say you had to glue something, re-glue something, you can do that the day before. It can dry overnight, and then you're ready to go the next day. Is do, as your maiden flight draws closer and closer, excuse me, I'm just going to sip of coffee here. The excitement builds, and you're just pumped to get out there and fly your plane. And sometimes, I know what's happened to me more times than I care to admit to, is you start to, because you're so excited, my common sense will start to get clouded a little bit, because I want to get this plane flying, and certain simple things I will overlook. So a while back on my blog, I wrote a post called "Am I Ready to Fly Really?" And that was inspired after watching a video from Ground Control RC. I'll have a link to his channel down below. He's got all kinds of great tips and tutorials. So one of the things, I have a little bit of a checklist, I guess, now every time I go to the field just to fly. But before a maiden flight, I think it's really, really important. So what I do is I'll kind of go over my plane, fairly closely, making sure that all my glue joints are feeling pretty good. Sometimes we get building a plane, towards the end, we dry fit something, it fits pretty snug, and then we get distracted or we move on to something else, and you might have forgot to glue a little bit. So check all your glue seams. Check to make sure your motor is good and secure. Your prop is mounted correctly. The numbers on the prop are on the front, so you always want the numbers of the prop facing the direction of travel. Make sure your motor is spinning in the correct direction. Check all your servos, all your linkages. Make sure that nothing's come loose, that you might have adjusted something and then didn't tighten it up enough. Make sure your hinges and all your control surfaces are all good. And then you want to make sure that you turn the plane on, or plug the plane in, and then make sure that all of your control surfaces are dead center with zero trim. You want to start off your maiden flight with zero trim and your control surfaces at dead center. And then the other thing, again, do this at home when you're not real excited, is you want to make sure, I'm just going to fire it up here real quick. You just want to make sure that all your control surfaces are moving. Oh, there's a battery in there already. All your control surfaces are moving the way that they're supposed to move, okay? I know I've done it before, and I still see guys doing it again. They're all excited to fly, they waggle the sticks. Oh, okay, everything's moving, I'm good to go. And then they don't pay attention and find out that things are actually moving in the wrong direction, okay? So I fly with mode 2, so up, down, left, right on my sticks there. So I notice I've got some trim here, that's something that I need to adjust again. So especially if you're flying elevons only, you want to pull back on the stick and make sure that your surfaces go up evenly. Like there right now, I've got some uneven deflection in my control surfaces, which I need to adjust. So what that would happen is if I pulled back like that in an elevons only plane, it's going to, because my left elevon is higher than my right, it's going to induce roll. Okay, so you want to make sure that those are centered. So I'm not going to go through fixing that now. I don't want the video to get any longer than it is. And then in the roll, go to the left. Your left surfaces should come up. Your right surfaces should go down. And then right surfaces go up. Left surfaces go down. And really pay attention to your ailerons. I've had it happen to me, and I've seen it happen at my field. Guys are excited, and their ailerons are reversed, so they take off, they go to turn left, and the plane actually turns right. 20 feet away from you, just after you've launched it, is not when you want your brain to start short-circuiting. And also, the other thing that I've seen is that they may, depending on how your transmitter and your receiver is set up, they go to turn, and both the ailerons deflect in the same direction, so you're not getting any roll authority on them. So again, like I said, just a good common sense inspection that your control surfaces are moving correctly, and that you're starting from dead center with zero trim. So I'll go back later and fix that elevon problem. Okay, so that's where we're at. I'm just going to keep this over here. So you get out to the field, you've balanced in the pitch, you've balanced in the roll, you're confident that everything's good to go. Obviously do another quick pre-flight check just before you launch. And then there's several different ways again of how people launch their airplanes. I've actually been whacked in the finger by a prop spinning at about 65–70% throttle because I was launching a plane incorrectly. And then it did a nasty little dive on me and whacked the end of my finger. It took 13 stitches to get that fixed up, and 3 years later I still have some nerve endings in there that aren't quite completely regenerated. So these props can really hurt you. So do whatever you can, do it in a way that you're absolutely minimizing your exposure to getting hit by a spinning prop. So I'm left-handed, so I'm pretty lucky that way. I hold my plane sort of right here, sort of with my thumb on the leading edge here. And my hand is actually very close to where the center of gravity is. So the plane should actually leave my hand fairly balanced already, okay? Rather than, grabbing it out here by the wing or maybe holding it up close to the nose. This is just what works for me. So because I'm left-handed, I'll have the plane in my hand. I sort of reach down, advance the throttle. I don't normally launch any more than 50–60% throttle, because if I hammered on full throttle and let go of the plane, I've got the motor is spinning at full bore, and I let go of the plane, and then I could end up with a pretty serious torque roll issue. So if you've matched your power setup to your plane correctly, 50–60% throttle should work just fine for launch. and I just sort of launch it, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 degree angle. Just give it a gentle toss, like don't fling it like you're trying to win the Super Bowl and you have to throw a long bomb Hail Mary pass. I just kind of gently toss it at the altitude I want it to start flying at, and then away we go. And then I will also, because I'm holding my transmitter, I can do a little bit of controlling here with my thumb as it starts to fly away, and now it's left my hand, and now I get my hands back on both hands back on the transmitter. Now what I do is normally, I just fly straight up, just climb out, apply whatever power you think you need to, keep it all away from, obviously, from stalling, and I just fly it up there. I just don't fly out in a straight line till it turns into a dot. I sort of fly, out maybe, I don't know, 150 feet or so, and I climb up. I like to get my plane up around at least 100 feet, probably higher. You hear this old adage, take your plane up 2 to 3 mistakes high. Well, for me, there's no context as to what 2 to 3 mistakes high is, and if you're brand new or quite a new pilot, you probably need and want a little bit more altitude as a buffer. So I get it up there, I get it up above 100 feet. I maybe have to gently turn just as I get up there, and then what I normally will do is start off from one side to the other and kind of get the plane going. I should hold my hand down here, I guess. Get the plane kind of going in front of me, and then I'll release keep whatever power on I need to keep it flying, and then I release this stick here, and then pay attention to what the plane's doing. So if you see it start to nose down or it wants to continue climbing, this plane was tail heavy when I launched it, so it wanted to continue to keep flying. And then what I do is, I'll start to trim it, but if it needs a lot of trim, what I'll do is quite often what I'll do is if I've released the stick and the nose is starting to dive, is I'll get it back under control. I'll pull up, and then I'll actually have the plane sort of in a climb, and then I might bang on 2 or 3 clicks of trim, let go of the stick, see what it's doing, and then continue doing that. Normally I will balance or trim it initially in the pitch, so that I'm not worried about it kind of porpoising, and then I might have to do some trimming in the roll. So if you get lucky and it's balanced pretty well on the CG, and maybe you've only needed 2 or 3 clicks of trim here or there, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. For this plane, when I maidened it, I had to bang on full down trim to get it to balance properly. So what I did was, once I did that and I felt confident that I could bring it in and land it safely and it wasn't going to do any crazy pitch up as I came in and landed it. And then what I did was I adjusted the battery, and I don't normally like to adjust the battery in huge increments at a time. Excuse me. Maybe no more than ½ an inch at a time. I'll move the battery, forward or backward, depending on whether it's nose or tail heavy, and then I might take out just a couple of bits of trim that I've put in, launch it again, see how it's going. If it's still, I got to put more trim in, then you just keep doing that routine until you get the battery moved sort of forward or aft, until you don't need quite as much trim. I mean, trim is a fact of life, I think, in any plane, but what I don't want to have, personally, I don't like to have happen is I have to have full trim to fly my plane. I want to be able to fix it to get it balanced properly, because if I'm flying with full trim, then I probably don't have my plane balanced correctly, especially in the pitch. So I'll keep working towards that, getting it trimmed, adjusting the battery until I feel that I'm pretty much, the plane is pretty much balanced without needing a whole lot of trim to keep the nose either level, from keeping it from flying tail heavy or nose heavy. And then once I do that and I'm pretty confident that I have it trimmed in the pitch, then what I'll do is, using where my battery ended up being, is I'll redo this test. Like, for example, I'll just point it out here. This was where I marked the original CG based on the plans, on RC Power's plans, and my balance point ended up ½ an inch ahead of that. So I'll just show you. So if I went back and tried to balance on their CG, I'm actually way nose heavy now, because of my battery is quite a bit further forward. So then I balance on where my CG is. This is where the plane is optimally balanced, and it's about there. So what you want to do is, once you feel like the plane is pretty well balanced, is then, check it again, keep moving your thumbs or your fingers or however you want to support it until you find that it's balanced. And then normally what I do is I'll just kind of dig my thumbnails into the foam a little bit just to make a little mark, and then you can make a more permanent mark in the foam, and then that way now that's where your plane balances it the best. And then, if you decide you wanted to try a different size battery, or you put a new motor in it, whatever else, and you need to reassess your CG, you already know where you've found your CG. Okay, so we've got it balanced in the pitch. Got our CG figured out. Got it, trimmed in pretty decently. And then what I like to do is, this is going to take place over half a dozen or more flights, depending on how much I've had to adjust the plane to get it to fly properly. Is what I will do is I wait probably at least a half a dozen flights or so. Is I'll land, and I will, if I have, let's say I had 6 clicks of left trim, I'll just take a piece of paper and make sure that I write that down so that I remember. And then what I'll do is after I write all my trim and the pitch and the roll down, if I have any, is I will take my transmitter and I'll zero out all my trims in the pitch and the roll primarily, and then I'll look at my control surfaces and see what's happening. Because what happens is when you first start flying the plane, now all your control surfaces, your linkages, your servos, now they come under force. When you've just built it and you're playing around, they're not really under any force. But when you're flying it, of course, they have all that pressure and force. So the hinges start to break in, and the servos and push rods, they start to get sort of seated where they need to be properly. So what can often happen, what happened with this plane, for example, is after about 8 flights I did that check, and when I landed, took the trim out, my right elevon was actually deflected up by a couple of millimeters. So I was actually left trimming against some of that, and the plane wanting to roll to the right. So I adjusted that, got that dead center again. You might have to do that. I tend to do that a couple times, maybe in the first 20 flights, and by then pretty much everything else is broken in. So now that I make sure that my surfaces are correct, then what I'll do is I'll start to fly it, take it up high again, and I'll start to fly it a bit more aggressively, more aggressive turns, rolls, loops, and that sort of thing. And I'll start to evaluate what's going on with my throws. Do I have too much in the pitch or not enough in the roll? Or for example, if you're using elevons and ailerons, sometimes if you've got an imbalance between the deflection of your ailerons and your elevons, is your plane, when it rolls, it sort of, I always want my planes to roll axially, like there's essentially a rod down the center and the plane is rotating around that. I don't like to see the nose wandering all over the place in a roll. So you can adjust those throws to make sure that the plane, loops, rolls, turns, and everything else to the rate that you like, the way that you like to fly, and then adjust those in. Now again, that takes a few flights, and I don't adjust it a whole bunch. Like I won't drop my pitch by unless it's something like silly crazy. I don't necessarily knock down my pitch by 25% or something at one time. I might just reduce it 5 or 10% at a time, fly it around a bit more, and then dial it in as you go. So I know that this seems like a long process, but you can't really. I've never sort of had a plane completely balanced, trimmed, throws correctly within the first flight. It just takes a while, and if you have the time and the patience, just like having the time and the patience to do all those pre-flight checks and inspections, pardon me, you're going to set yourself up for success, I think, long term. Okay, so there we go. You get your plane dialed in. You've survived the maiden flight, and you're getting through the first several flights, and you start to feel comfortable with it, and then you just kind of dial it in whatever way you like to fly. Now, another trick that I like to use, and the reason that I use the tape initially to mark my battery, is once I know where my battery is going to be pretty much permanently, is I'll take a Sharpie marker and then I make a little mark in my battery bay here. because then that way, if I, for some reason I don't fly the plane for 2 or 3 weeks, I know where the mark is. That's where my battery goes. Now, I know this sounds silly, and again, I'm not preaching, trying to insult your intelligence, but if you use a couple of different sizes of batteries, I just use strictly 2200 3-cell. But let's say you like to fly with a 2200 on a windier day, so your plane's got a little bit more weight and presence, and you like to fly with maybe a lighter battery on a calmer day. Because you've already marked where your CG is, after you've taken the time to balance your plane, you can put that different weight battery in. Obviously, it's going to be in a different spot. Balance it, fly it, and you should be good to go. But if you have the 2 marks, the lesson that I learned is make sure that, wherever your, say, 1600 battery is, put a little 1.6. Wherever your 2200 battery is, put maybe a little 2.2. I forgot to do that once, and I went out a few weeks later, dropped a battery in there. I was all excited to go fly, and unfortunately, I put the wrong battery in the wrong place, and then I put my plane out of balance just by doing something silly as that. So anyway, just a word to the wise. So again, there'll be more links for more advanced thinking on this stuff below. Like I said, take the time in a relaxed environment at home to do a lot of this stuff. Find where your battery needs to be to balance on that initial CG per the plans. Do your good pre-flight inspection. It'll just remove a lot of the stress before you get out there. And then once you find your CG, make sure you mark where your new CG is, your new balance point is on your plane. Mark where your batteries go, and you should be good to go for plenty of long-term enjoyment with your plane. So I hope that's been helpful. I know maybe for some guys that was pretty basic, and I know there's a lot of ways, different ways to do these things. Again, these are based on my experience of 5.5 years of flying park jets. These techniques have just worked really well for me. So please post any comments down below, any questions. Thank you very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.